Welcome to Heartbreak Revealed. Discover real stories of wives, betrayals, and shocking twists. Hit subscribe button and let's get to our story. Lenny Davis wasn't the darkest guy I'd ever met, but he was in the top 10. He wasn't very dark at all. He just seemed that way. He wasn't even 6 feet tall, but he always left an impression. Maybe it was the permanent scowl on his face or the scars with a bluish tinge. He was definitely not a man you'd want to meet in a dark alley. I was lucky to have him on my side. My name is Mike Johnson, and I manage a small company called Divine Distribution, which packages and distributes large quantities of DVDs, CDs, and other similar products. It's labor-intensive work, and getting people to do it for minimum pay is next to impossible. Don't be fooled by the name, there's nothing divine about it. By using several loopholes in federal and state laws, we hire people who appreciate the opportunity, but are borderline legal. My workforce consists mostly of Jamaicans, including Lenny, with a few Dominicans and Haitians thrown in. Although they were all appreciative of the work, sometimes they slacked off. It was difficult to keep them working to their fullest potential until I realized the power of Lenny Davis. I watched him carefully for about 2 weeks and finally decided to approach him. He was articulate and spoke with what I thought was a perfect British accent. But what did I know about those accents? He grinned broadly when I offered him the job of shop supervisor. It was, to say the least, a little unnerving. The new job came with a nice raise and a few fringe benefits that none of the floor workers had. I got the feeling there was more to him than appeared, but I wasn't interested enough to ask questions. Productivity increased almost 30. I was happy, the company was happy, and Lenny was happy. He seemed to be where he was meant to be. It was hard to explain. The company was now running smoothly. If things went as planned, we would be able to continue operating for at least another 18 months before we were shut down for some state or federal violations. This was my 6th similar enterprise in the last 10 years. It paid good money, but wasn't what you'd call a career opportunity. I stashed away as much as possible in anticipation of leaner times. The good thing was that I usually had another operation ready to go when one closed down. I don't really remember how I got into this line of work. I was never a mainstream type of guy. Doing things the normal way was boring and predictable, not what I was looking for. My younger brother Eddie was just the opposite. The most important thing in his life was his union job with the local electric company. He always knew where and when his next paycheck was coming from, and he was comfortable with that. I was happy for him, but never envious. Eddie and I both married our high school sweethearts. Now that's boring and not nearly as romantic as it seems. Eddie and Karen had twin boys who just turned 16. My wife Linda and I had a daughter Jenny, who had just been accepted at Yale, and a 17-year-old son Steve, who was trying everything to get into a military academy. He wasn't particular about where he went, but was determined. Karen worked at a local insurance claims company. They processed claims for over 20 small insurance agencies in the tri-state area. Linda was never interested in going to work, and I was happy with the way things were. We had enough to live on, and I felt a comfortable, happy home life was more important than extra money. And that was about it. Life was good in Fairview. It wasn't really Fairview, but I remembered the name from an old TV show and always related it to things that were perfect. Life was good until I decided to run down to the shopping mall and pick up a few office supplies. I had a girl to do that, but I was always looking for excuses to get out of the office. The shopping went quickly because I knew what I wanted before I even left the office. I don't usually browse. I grab what I need, pay, and go. The Westgate Mall was a 2-story behemoth with an open atrium in the middle. I guess it's an atrium, though I'm not sure of the actual word for it. I was sitting at a table in the second-level food court, overlooking the first floor, when I saw Karen and Linda coming down the center. Apparently, Karen had taken off work so she and Linda could do some last-minute shopping before their mini-girl vacation. After much begging, pleading, and bribing, Eddie and I consented to let Karen and Linda take a 5-day vacation to an all-inclusive resort in Jamaica near Montego Bay. Eddie and I weren't crazy about the idea, but finally agreed if they promised to stay at the resort and not wander around the island unescorted. They would be leaving in 2 days. I was just about to call out and wave to them when something stopped me. They paused in front of a Victoria's Secret shop, not a normal venue for either of them. I sat back down and quietly watched as they entered the store without hesitation. Interesting, quite interesting. I got a fresh cup of coffee and made myself as comfortable as I could in one of those crappy plastic chairs. It was at least 20 minutes later when they came out. I wasn't within hearing range, but I could tell they were joking and giggling as they exited. Instead of leaving, they sat on the bench in front of the store. Each of them took some items from the Victoria's Secret bag and dropped them into a Walmart bag. They dropped the Victoria's Secret bags into the trash can at the end of the bench and walked down the mall towards the exit, still giggling. It took me less than a minute to get down the escalator and over to the waste container. I didn't even try to be discreet. I just took off the top of the can and reached in. I left the mall without replacing the top on the trash can. I guess that was inconsiderate. Chuckle, chuckle. I waited until I got out to the car to look inside the bags. I didn't know what I was looking for because they had removed whatever they bought. I didn't know which bag was which, but inside each of them were a few sales handouts and a receipt. They each bought 2 pairs of baby doll sleepers. One bill was for $55 and the other for $65. Both were paid for with cash. Now Linda never pays cash for anything. It all goes on the credit cards. Needless to say, she had my attention. I didn't want to jump to any conclusions until I had a chance to confront her. Actually, I wasn't going to confront her, but rather let her have an opening to explain the purchases. I had to conclude that they were bought specifically for her upcoming trip, which Eddie and I were not going on. On the drive back to work, I saw dark clouds on the horizon, but the sun was still shining. I was sulking at my desk, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong when Lenny Davis walked in. "Mr. Johnson, I sense that something is wrong. Is it a problem I should be aware of?" "No, Mr. Davis. It's not a problem that should concern you. Everything is fine with the floor and the work. You have nothing to worry about." I motioned for him to sit. He was smiling but still had a look of anxiety on his face. We sat in silence for a few moments. "Mr. Davis, where in Jamaica are you from?" "I am from Falmouth but spent most of my time in the Montego Bay area. Why does this interest you?" I paused a short while and rocked back in my chair. "Do you have any friends in the Montego Bay area?" "I have lots of acquaintances, but only a few friends. I also know a few people there who are not very friendly. In fact, that's why I'm here now." I reached into my bottom desk drawer and got out a bottle of Jack Daniels and 2 glasses. The glasses weren't what you'd call clean, but they were usable. Lenny Davis didn't refuse when I pushed the filled glass in his direction. "Is it a money problem?" He sipped and smiled. "Yes, it is. Not much, only 10,000, but enough to make me seek safer surroundings." He noticed I was smiling and knew it wasn't because of his situation, but because of what I was contemplating. I get the feeling that Mr. Johnson needs my help and is trying to figure out how we can benefit each other. Am I correct? I thought it was funny he referred to me in the third person and laughed a little. "Mr. Davis, are any of your friends or acquaintances of disreputable character?" Now he was laughing. "Of course, Mr. Johnson, they all are." We were both smiling as I filled the glasses a second time. We sat quietly for what seemed like several minutes, but might have been less. "Tomorrow, Mr. Davis. Tomorrow we will help each other." He smiled again as he got up to leave, and I noticed the gold tooth on the right side towards the rear. I thought it was a little ominous. It was a family dinner that night. Jenny let everyone know that she could start a summer session at Yale if she left within a week. Linda wasn't thrilled with the idea but was outvoted. Steve had decided he wanted to complete a year at the Marine Military Academy in Texas before starting college. I had previously rejected the idea because of the expense, but tonight I felt different. Linda gave me an odd look when I supported Steve's idea but didn't say anything. After the kids left the table, I asked her about her day. Karen and I got the last few things we needed for the trip. I got the cutest little flip-flops. We decided not to take a camera because we were worried about losing it. We each got new swimsuits, 2-piece ones, but modest. We're not young, you know. I smiled a little at the way she was chatting. She was nervous, and when that happens, she tends to talk too much. If I let her rattle on, she might eventually trip herself up, but I already got the answer I was looking for. She said nothing about the trip to Victoria's Secret and didn't hint at it. She was still talking, but I was no longer paying attention. She finally realized what she was doing and shut up. It was too late. She gave it away without even admitting anything. It would have been easy to confront her, but that would have accomplished nothing. There was a lot more going on than a trip to a fancy lingerie store. Linda was fairly quiet for the rest of the evening. I could tell she felt a little uncomfortable about her talk session. Any further discussion on her part would have just made it worse. Linda was setting up the DVR to record her programs while she was gone, while I started checking out tuition fees and our total assets. It was not a pretty picture. I would need at least $75,000 a year for Jenny, and the one high school year for Steve would be $20,000. I decided to prepay 4 years for Jenny, but just the 1 year for Steve. That would leave me with less than $30,000 in the bank. I could figure out Steve's college program later. Hell, he didn't even know where he was going to go. I gathered up all the addresses I would need and prepared letters and envelopes. All I would need to do the next day would be to make a trip to the bank and a few phone calls. Maybe I was rushing things. Maybe there was no problem. All I had to base my concern on was a trip to the mall and a bad feeling in my stomach. Linda had already gone to bed when I decided to call Eddie. He always stayed up to watch the late show. "Eddie, are you still up?" "Yes, Mike. What can I do for you? Is the late show on yet?" "Nope. 10 minutes to go. Talk fast." "Eddie, I don't mean to get you upset or anything, but has Karen been acting funny lately? Don't jerk me around, Mike. What's going on? You know, little stuff that just doesn't seem right. You mean like the Tupperware parties and home shopping parties? Maybe. Why are they funny?" Mike, Karen, and Linda have started going to these things regularly, along with book club meetings and card parties. "Yeah, so what? Karen doesn't read much, she hates to play cards, and she never buys anything at those damn parties. Did you say anything to her?" "Hell no. I didn't want to take the chance of ruining my marriage." "What do you mean, Mike? If I accuse her of something, or even hint at it, and I'm wrong, my life would be a living hell. I ain't saying a damn thing until I have more to go on. Did she show you what she bought while she was shopping today?" "Yeah, a swimsuit, a pair of sandals, and a floppy hat." "Why?" I just wondered. There was an awkward lull in the conversation, which I finally broke. "Eddie, does that guy you know from high school still work in the personnel department at Continental Claims Associates?" "Yeah, I think so." "Why? Could you call him tomorrow and ask if any other company employees are taking vacations at the same time Karen is?" "Mike, what the hell is going on?" "Eddie, I don't know. I just know that something is not right. Linda doesn't have a lot of opportunities to meet guys, but Karen does. This trip to Jamaica seems a little fishy to me. Maybe I should just talk to Karen." "No way, Eddie. Whatever you do, don't say anything to her." Okay, I'll call him. Gotta go now. The late show's starting." I slept on the couch that night. No specific reason, but I just didn't feel like crawling into bed with Linda. I closed out 2 money market accounts and cashed in 3 certificates of deposit. I called all the appropriate agencies at Yale and the military school before getting the cashier's checks drawn up. What wasn't needed for tuitions and such, I took in cash. I left $1,000 in the checking account. Before lunch, I had 4 years of Jenny's college paid for and a year of military school for Steve. As I was leaving the post office, I got a call from Eddie. "Mike, you were right." "About what?" "All of it." "Well, Corey in the personnel office told me that Karen has been playing around with one of the auditors, a guy named Calvin Barnes. It's common knowledge in the company, and I don't know why I haven't heard about it before. Anyway, Calvin and a friend of his, Jason Ellis, are taking vacations at the same time Karen is." Damn it, I was afraid of something like that. "Can you get me any info about those guys other than their names?" "Got it already, Mike. I'll send you a couple of company ID photos over the phone. The guy with the glasses is Barnes." "Thanks, Eddie. Hey, bro, I'm sorry about all of this." "Don't apologize to me, Mike. It's my wife who got Linda into this mess." "Eddie, meet me after work at the Red Rooster. We have things to talk about." "Gotcha. Good afternoon. Must be nice to be the boss." Lenny Davis was smiling as I walked into my office. I just smiled back without saying anything as Gloria, my secretary, brought in 2 cups of coffee. Lenny waited patiently as I downloaded the 2 photos from my phone to the computer. In 2 minutes, he had a hard copy in his hand and a photo of each man on his phone. There was a wicked little grin on his face as he sat in anticipation. "Can we get down to business now, Mr. Davis?" "Most certainly, Mr. Johnson." It took less than an hour to come to an agreement and settle on a price. He was happy, and I was happy. However, Eddie might not be too pleased when I told him what his share of all this was going to cost. Eddie dropped a small bomb on me when we met after work. He had decided he was going to visit our uncle in Tennessee for an indefinite period. Eddie, that's a little drastic under the circumstances, don't you think? I was awake all last night thinking about things. Today I made half a dozen calls to people to verify my suspicions about Karen's activities. It's not too drastic, Mike. If anything, it's a little too late. Sorry, Eddie. I never realized. It appears I didn't have a clue about what was going on in my own marriage either. What's wrong with us, Mike? Why did they do this? And how come we didn't see it coming? For the next few moments, we sat quietly eating peanuts and sipping on warm beer. I ordered a couple more cold ones and smiled at my brother. How can I help you out, Eddie? What can I do? We're okay, Mike. I got a small trailer lined up. The boys and I are going to pack up most of what we'll need and should be in Tennessee by the next day. What about your job? You love the job. I know, it was a hard choice. I already called Grant. He said I won't have any trouble getting some type of work there. Whatever it is, it won't have all the fancy union benefits, but the boys and I will get by. I'll be taking all our savings and investments with us when we go. What are you going to tell Karen? I'm leaving her a note that we went to Alaska. I always talked about going there, so she might be gullible enough to buy it, at least for a while. Oh yeah, that reminds me. Eddie, you owe me $4,000. What? What the hell do I owe you $4,000 for? You gotta trust me, Eddie. It's money well spent, and it's better if you don't know any more than that. Will I get it back? Probably not. Crap. I decided to give Linda another chance to come clean after supper that evening. The results were no better this time. She did mention that since her cell phone wouldn't work there, she was leaving it at home. She told me to assume everything was okay unless I heard otherwise. If there was a problem, she promised she'd find a way to let me know. Since Linda was going to spend the evening packing for her trip, I decided to take the kids out for a night of bowling. The suggestion was met with a lot of groans and eye-rolling, which stopped as soon as I shook my head and drew my finger across my lips. We did go to the bowling alley, but we never did bowl. It was not something I wanted to do, but something I had to do. At this point, I didn't actually know anything, but I felt strong enough about what was going on to take action. I explained to the kids what was going on. Jenny seemed to understand, but Steve was not happy. Both kids were excited about the school preparations, especially Steve, who had no idea up to this point that I had set everything up. Jenny was ready to leave as soon as possible, and was thrilled when I told her she could take Linda's Volvo. She wasn't expecting a car at all. I thought it was the fair thing to do. Steve would be staying with my parents until arrangements could be made for him to go to the military school. He would probably still be here when Linda returned from her vacation. We would just have to wait and see if that caused any problems. The kids would be able to store all their personal belongings at my parents' place for as long as necessary. I was not sure what I would be doing. Eddie and I both arrived at the departure terminal at the same time. We didn't talk, but nodded to each other from 50 feet away. Karen and Linda were laughing and giggling as they entered the facility together. They remembered to turn, wave, and smile at both of us before leaving the platform. Eddie and I did not smile back. When I arrived at work, I was greeted with a bevy of government cars and a few police units. This was a scenario I'd been through before, so I just tightened my belt and walked in. Gloria was waiting for me with a smile on her face. She'd also seen this before. The work floor was almost entirely empty. There were a few Haitians milling around, but no Jamaicans or Dominicans, including Lenny Davis. Gloria had already called the lawyers. I spent the next 30 minutes talking gibberish to several government suits but couldn't determine if they were local, state, or federal. It didn't really matter. The legal beagles finally showed up, and Gloria and I slipped away with no problem. We were having coffee at Starbucks when Eddie called. "Mike, I just heard on the radio that the feds hit your place. What's going on?" "It's okay, Eddie. The company has control over everything. Gloria and I are enjoying a hot cup right now. How about your end? I took care of things at work and the bank. The boys and I are packing the rest of the day and will leave tomorrow morning. Sounds good, brother. Do you need anything?" "We're fine, Mike. By the way, I also saw a lawyer. The divorce paperwork has been started. Sorry to hear that, but I think we both knew it was coming. They'll serve the papers the day she gets back. I'll be long gone. I guess I'll have to pick them both up at the airport when they get home. I'll just drop Karen off at the house. Is that okay? Sounds great to me. I guess they're there by now, all settled in their rooms. Are you sure you don't want to let me in on what's going on? No way, brother. The less you know, the better. I don't think anything will happen until tomorrow. You can think about it while cruising down Route 81. No sooner had I hung up the phone than I got a call from Pierce Donovan, our division chief, and the man who sets up the new operations. Gloria and I were summoned to headquarters in King of Prussia the next morning. Gloria seemed happy about it, but I had some reservations. I can't explain it because I really like the job. I made arrangements to pick Gloria up the next morning and headed home. Jenny already had her car packed for her trip. I would have liked to go with her, but she assured me she was ready to take care of herself. Under the circumstances, I didn't argue with her. Most of her things were in cardboard boxes in the garage to go to my parents' place for storage. Steve was packing almost all his things for storage. The military school would provide everything he needed. They better, for the price they were charging. Dad would drive him down so he could visit a few old Air Force buddies in San Antonio. Mom was very adamant about begging out of that trip. I was proud of the way the kids were handling things. They had a better idea about what they wanted to do than I did. I decided to stay with Mom while Dad was traveling. That meant I had a lot of packing to do too. We didn't receive a call from Linda, and I hadn't expected one. She carefully set the stage by explaining she'd only call if there was a problem. The kids and I went to Luigi's for pizza and picked up a couple of bundles of boxes and more packing tape on the way home. It was 2 a.m. before I had all my things sorted and ready to go. Dad was coming over in the morning with his pickup to collect everything. It would probably take at least 3 trips. At least it would keep the kids busy while I was at work. The next company operation would be started up in Lancaster. The bigwigs were a little disappointed when I declined this one. I did, however, recommend Gloria because she knew as much about running things as I did, and she was ready to move up. As soon as we left the office, she was on the phone to her husband to relay the good news. It would almost double her salary. She was one happy girl. I had no idea what I would be doing. On the way home, I got a call from Eddie. He and the boys were just getting into Tennessee. He seemed happy. I felt good for him. The kids were staying with Mom and Dad, but I decided to stay one more night at the house to get all the loose ends tightened up. I was just about finished for the evening when the phone rang. "Mr. Johnson, it's nice to see you're home. Welcome, my friend. Where the hell are you?" "I'm home, of course, taking care of business as you requested. And you have international calling with your cell phone?" "Of course, everybody here does. I assume you have good news for me?" It was a statement posed as a question. "Most certainly, sir. In fact, things went far easier than I anticipated. You can rest assured that all your problems have been taken care of. Thank you. You're a true friend, Mr. Johnson. I only did what you paid me to do. Why do I feel it's more than that? Be careful, Mr. Johnson. You don't want to fall into that trap. We were both laughing for no particular reason. Mr. Johnson, I was sorry to hear about your trouble at work. I hope you've survived any repercussions. I'm fine. I'm also curious as to how you got all your people out of the way. I have friends in the INS, Mr. Johnson. I guess I should have let you know, but I decided against it. I was able to take care of all my people, but some of the Haitians were a little hard-headed. I think it all worked out well. What are your plans now? I think I'll take a short break until I can get a few personal problems worked out. Mr. Johnson, remember this number and stay in touch. I think I might have something you'll be interested in." That would be nice. I'll plan to do that. I still had 2 more beers to finish up before getting some sleep. It would be 3 more days until Linda and Karen returned from their vacation. After the first day, I found myself doing redundant things. I stopped and saw a lawyer, Glenn Ross, to find out exactly what my obligations would be if I filed for a divorce. There wasn't enough money left to open an offshore account or anything like that. I decided not to shut off the utilities. I was just not going to pay for anything anymore. My credit rating was going to take a big hit, but I figured I could handle it. The next morning, Jenny left for Connecticut in her new Volvo. Her summer session would be starting in 10 days. Mom and Dad gave her a little nest egg to help her get settled in. Steve and Dad decided to take off the same day Linda was getting back. Steve wanted to avoid any unpleasant confrontations. I thought it was a good idea. They had a few stops planned on the way, including some Memphis barbecue and New Orleans gumbo. Everybody except me seemed to be happy. I was trying like hell not to wallow in my misery. The only thing that seemed to help was beer. Later that night, I got another call from Lenny. Unfortunately, it was on my cell phone. "Mr. Johnson, is anything happening on your end?" "What do you mean?" "The gentlemen in question have been missing for 2 days now, and the ladies haven't notified the hotel personnel or the local police. Did they report this to your local authorities?" "Not that I know of." "Why haven't they contacted any officials in the immediate area? My people tell me they seem baffled or confused about what to do. They're definitely not having a good time. My guess is that they're afraid that if they draw attention to the situation, they'll expose themselves as, I don't know what the proper term is, Mr. Johnson. I don't want to offend you in any way. So they're doing nothing. It appears that they're constantly looking for the gentleman to show up and hoping things will resolve themselves. I'm afraid they'll be greatly disappointed. Mr. Davis, what are you suggesting I do? As I see it, there's nothing you can do. We have to wait for them to decide to report it either here or back in the States when they return. That would be awkward. What local authorities would they go to report a crime that took place in Jamaica, Mr. Johnson? I believe you've created quite a dilemma for your wife. I have a feeling she wishes she had never taken this trip. No matter what she does, she'll be in trouble. I thank you for the call, Mr. Davis. I'm going to sleep with a smile on my face tonight. I'll call you if anything changes. Mr. Johnson? Morning brought a lot of anxiety. I didn't sleep as well as I thought I would. The first thing I did was make a quick call to Eddie to see if he had heard anything from Karen. He hadn't. The trip for him and the boys went well, and they were comfortably settled in. Before hanging up, Eddie mentioned he would turn off his cell phone for the next 2 weeks. He told me to call Grant's number if I needed to get in touch with him. It was the longest day of my life. I checked and double-checked the house to ensure I had taken care of everything. I saw the lawyer again and filled out an information form so I could file for divorce with no problems. I gave him a power of attorney to handle the separation and any other actions for me. Just on a whim, I gave him a hefty retainer for any possible future repercussions from the Jamaica fiasco. I was a little worried I might have gone too far. On the drive back to my parents' home, I realized none of my concerns had anything to do with my marriage. Sure, everything I had done resulted from Linda's infidelity, but the breakup didn't bother me. Somewhere along the line, I had resolved to accept it. There was a bit of serenity that came with that realization. Knowing the kids wouldn't suffer any great trauma made things a lot easier. I don't know why I didn't feel worse. I felt betrayed, but not humiliated. That was strange because it wasn't what I had ever expected. Steve and Dad left with the rising sun. Steve got to drive the first leg of the trip. Mom insisted on packing a lunch for them, but I secretly think they were looking forward to a week or so of junk food. I had about 6 hours to kill before the plane arrived back from Jamaica. I got to spend some rare one-on-one time with Mom. She was supportive, but, just to be on the safe side, didn't say anything against Linda. They had gotten along fairly well over the years, and I think Mom was sad to see what transpired. I didn't park the car and go in to help them. I simply waited for them to come out of the terminal with their bags. I had to move the car twice, but just circled and came back. "Mike, why didn't you come in to help us get our bags? It's a hassle parking the car, and I figured this would be easier all around." "Mike, where is Eddie?" Karen noticed her husband hadn't come and felt obligated to inquire. "He and the boys are tied up. I told him I'd drop you off at the house in a few minutes. We were on the way." No one was talking for the first few miles. The silence was quite obvious. Linda seemed occupied looking out the side window, and Karen sat in the back trying to be inconspicuous. "Well, are you going to tell me about the trip? What you did, where you went? Did you have anything good to eat? You two are awfully quiet for just returning from a tropical vacation. It was a long flight, Mike. To tell you the truth, we're exhausted. I just want a hot shower and a soft bed. That's it? That's all you have to say for 5 days? I'll tell you all about it tomorrow, okay?" Since she was back to looking out the window, she didn't see me smiling to myself. The rest of the trip home was silent. It would have been easy to push the envelope a little, but I was having enough fun just watching them squirm. Since I hadn't heard anything from Lenny, I had to assume they didn't report the missing men to anyone. I wondered what they did with their luggage. Interesting. I dropped Karen off at their house and 10 minutes later pulled into our driveway. Linda looked at me with an odd expression when I removed her bags from the car and set them on the grass instead of carrying them into the house. As I got back into the car, she finally spoke. "Mike, where are you going? Aren't you coming into the house? What about my bags? I have to run right now, darling. I'll call you later." She looked bewildered, standing there watching me drive away. I would have loved to see her face when she discovered I had moved out of the house. Of course, she wouldn't have a lot of time to dwell on it because Karen was probably on the phone by now. "Mike, Linda has called 3 times already. She keeps asking me what's going on, and I keep trying to avoid answering her. Mike, you know I'm no good at that kind of stuff. I don't like what happened, but I don't want to be in the middle of it either. You're going to have to talk to her." "Sorry, Mom. The next time she calls, I'll take it." "Did she ask about the kids at all?" "No, she was sort of babbling about an empty house and a problem Karen seemed to be having. I didn't try to give her an explanation. I just put her off." I grabbed a beer from the fridge and got comfortable in the easy chair by the phone. It was only a 10-minute wait for the next call. "Mike, what the hell is going on? Can you be a little more specific? What are you doing over at your parents' house? Where are the kids? I'd appreciate some answers. What the hell is wrong?" Jenny left for school. She wanted to get settled so she could take a few summer sessions. "Everything's fine. You don't have to worry about her." Why couldn't she have waited until I got back? What was the big hurry? I don't know. I guess she was anxious. "All of Steve's things are gone." "Where is he?" "Dad and Steve are on their way to Texas. He's finally getting to go to one of those military schools he's been nagging us about. Since he's going to be gone for at least a year, he put all his stuff in storage like Jenny did." "Why didn't you discuss this with me?" "I'm their parent too. You completely left me out of everything. That's not fair." "Yeah, I know. Life sucks." "What does that mean? You have no reason to get sarcastic. What the hell are you doing at your parents' house? Did you move out too?" "Bingo. Jackpot. You figured it out." "Yes, I moved out. You have the house all to yourself." There was no quick retort. I don't know how long the silence was, but it seemed like minutes. I waited patiently for her next move. Karen called. She said Eddie and the twins were gone. He left a note saying they went to Alaska. "Do you know anything about that, Mike?" "Yeah, he told me a little bit." Linda hadn't mentioned the divorce papers Eddie said were going to be served on his wife. I could only assume it hadn't been done yet. "Mike, what brought all this on? Tell me something." "I try to stay out of Eddie's life, Linda. All I know is that he mentioned a guy named Calvin Barnes. Do you know him or anything about him?" This time the silence was a lot longer. I waited for some type of response. I'm sure she was thinking that if Eddie knew about Calvin, I must know about Jason. "Mike, I'm not feeling too good right now. I'm tired and I'm confused. I need to get some rest and think things over. Can you come by the house tomorrow?" "Sure, darling, I have plenty of time." "Oh, by the way, I think you should know that I also lost my job. I'm now officially unemployed." A few seconds later, the phone went dead. My mother was not happy. I was in no hurry to face Linda. I arrived at the house around 10 a.m. It would have to be done eventually. Karen was there. "Mike, we know what you did." It appeared that Linda would be the designated spokesperson. "Can you explain it to me? Don't be a smartass. It doesn't suit you." I decided not to respond to that. Karen contacted Corey. "You and Eddie knew about Calvin and Jason. Will told Eddie everything, and Eddie told you. You can't deny it, and you can't hide it. So who is this guy, Jason? How come you never mentioned him to me? Mike, you're trying to be cute again. You know perfectly well who Jason is. You also knew that Calvin and Jason were going on the trip to Jamaica with Karen and me. Everything she said was accurate, so I saw no reason to argue with her. Neither one of you made an attempt to stop us from going on that trip. You both knew we were going to a tropical island with 2 men, and you did nothing to halt it. What kind of husbands react that way? It was like you didn't care. Things were getting humorous now. Linda was carefully shifting the blame for the affair from the cheating wives to the indifferent husbands. She noticed me smiling, and her tone immediately changed. "It's not funny, you jerk. 2 good men are dead now because of you. You could have said something. You could have stopped it, but no, you had to go and have them killed. You didn't do it yourself, but we know damn well you arranged it. Did you report this?" "What do you mean? When did you realize they had been killed? Who did you notify?" "No one. We couldn't tell anybody. If we had, then you and Eddie would have discovered what we had done. We couldn't take the chance. So you left Jamaica without informing the authorities that the two men with you had been killed? I think somebody is going to be pissed." Both women just sat and stared at me. I was still smiling. "So, my loving wife, what are you going to do now?" "We're going to the police station and report it. It has to be done." "And pray tell me, just how are the local police going to handle a murder that happened in Jamaica? By the way, do they have the bodies or the murder weapons?" "There are no bodies." "You were too clever for that, weren't you?" "I don't know what I ever did to deserve this, Linda, but you go to the police and tell them the whole thing. Make sure the report shows exactly why the four of you went to Jamaica and what you intended to do there. I'll need that information for the divorce action." "You jerk." Karen took advantage of my comment to chime in. "Eddie had me served with papers last night. You knew that, didn't you? You were laughing to yourself all the way home from the airport, weren't you?" "Yeah, he did mention something like that before he left." I watched as Karen stormed out of the room. I couldn't tell if she was crying or just really pissed off. I stood up and walked toward the door. "Mike, I'm sorry. It wasn't supposed to turn out this way." Linda's voice had softened. "How is it supposed to turn out?" I waited for a few moments and got no answer. "Linda, can you at least give me some sort of explanation as to why you did this?" I waited a few moments while she got her thoughts together. "The kids were grown, and you were working all the time. My life had become drab and uninteresting. Karen had the same problem, and she said she solved it by making a few male friends outside the house." "A few male friends?" "Don't interrupt, Mike, or I won't be able to get through this. I decided it was worth a chance, so I had her fix me up with Jason." "So was it worth it?" I watched her squirm a little before answering. "Actually, Mike, yes, it was worth it. It was fun and exciting. I can't lie to you. I enjoyed every minute up until I met Jason. You were the only guy I'd ever been with. I would never consider leaving you to be with him, but I always had a good time when we were together. So I was just a big joke." "It wasn't like that, Mike. I wasn't trying to replace you or make fun of you. I was just trying to make my life a little more interesting. I really didn't need to hear any more." I turned and walked out the door. I went to Burger King for lunch. It was just before noon the next day when Detective Danny Green came to see me. He allowed me to drive my own car to the station. I think he did that so he wouldn't have to drive me back. He didn't seem too concerned about my showing up. We talked for 3 hours. I finally called Glenn Ross. He got everything settled so I could leave and also got copies of Linda's statement about the alleged murder. Her certified comments about the reason for the trip would be enough for the divorce papers. Detective Green seemed baffled. He said he'd have to contact the Montego Bay Police and Jamaican authorities before arriving at any course of action. I'm totally ignorant about all the terms used to describe the different levels of killing someone and what proof is required for each one. He tried to explain it to me, but I blocked it out. Late that night, I got another call from Lenny Davis. It was short, very short. "Tomorrow, Mr. Johnson. Tomorrow will be a glorious day." Tomorrow came, and nothing happened until about 2 p.m. when I got a call from Detective Green. He was sort of laughing as he talked, which I found unnerving. "Mr. Johnson, watch the 5 p.m. local news this evening and the 6 p.m. national news. I think you'll find it interesting." It was a short news blurb, but as Detective Green said, interesting. 2 local men were found wandering naked down a dirt road in the hills about 60 miles south of Montego Bay, Jamaica. The men claimed they'd been kidnapped and held for ransom at a goat farm in the mountains. They managed to escape early that morning and make their way toward town, where they were rescued. The national news was basically the same, except it had pictures of the 2 men and mentioned their names. A short while later, I got another call from Detective Green. He asked me to come in the next morning so we could discuss the circumstances surrounding the incident. I thought that was mighty generous of him. Mom thought the whole thing was hilarious, and I think she even winked at me. I slept well that night. As I went into Detective Green's office, I saw Linda and Karen being escorted into the same interrogation room I'd previously been in. I'm sure they were going to have a lot of fun the rest of the day. "Mr. Johnson, I'm not sure you're completely innocent concerning this affair, but I see your involvement from a far different perspective now." He was actually smiling when he said that. I couldn't help but return the expression. As I said before, I'm completely innocent of anything to do with the disappearance of those two men. I thought he was going to burst out laughing, but instead he offered me a cup of coffee. It appears, Mr. Johnson, that Mr. Barnes and Mr. Ellis made a midnight excursion from their vacation compound to purchase a little local weed, ganja by name. 5 minutes after they left the hotel, they were kidnapped, tied up, and taken on an hour's drive over rough mountain roads. This is all their version, you understand. I sipped the hot coffee that one of the uniformed officers brought into the office and smiled with a little nod. Both men were stripped of all their clothing and locked in a goat pen. A goat pen that just happened to have bars on the doors and windows. The next morning, they were informed that a ransom demand for $10,000 each had been delivered to the ladies who accompanied them to the hotel. They wouldn't be released until the ransom had been paid. Detective Green stopped for a moment and tasted some of the machine coffee. It sucked, but he seemed used to it. Detective Green, I don't believe my wife or my sister-in-law had access to that kind of money. Apparently not. The following day, Mr. Barnes and Mr. Ellis were told that the ransom demand had been dropped to $2,500 each. This was presented to both Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Davis. The coffee actually tasted a little better by this time. The next day, the price was $1,500 each, and on the day the ladies departed to come home, the price had dropped to $500 for both men. I can only assume the ransom was never paid. Oh, it gets better than that, Mr. Johnson, much better. He motioned to silently inquire if I wanted more coffee, but I declined. That night, the men conveniently overheard their captors talking. Since the ransom hadn't been paid, the kidnappers decided they would have to kill both of them in the morning. Luckily, they discovered that one of the windows in the hut was unlocked. I found it hard to control myself at that point, and my host was having the same difficulty. We managed to keep it down to muffled snickers. In a heroic effort, they broke free from their confinement and made a mad dash for freedom down the mountain with no shoes and no clothes. I swear that if it hadn't been such a serious situation, both of us would have burst out laughing. We took a moment to contain ourselves and then started up again. Mr. Johnson, neither your wife nor your sister-in-law ever got a ransom demand. Now, isn't that amazing? Is that a question or a comment? Both of us were actually laughing, but very quietly so as not to attract attention. Seriously though, Mr. Johnson, I'm sure you had some input into this entire fiasco. However, I don't see any reason for us to pursue anything at this end. Well, that is good news. Can I consider this case closed, or should I be prepared for something popping up in the future? It's closed as far as I'm concerned. Your wife and sister-in-law, however, have a few more questions to answer about the charges they made against you and your brother. Our legal people are reviewing their statements pretty closely. Linda and Karen were still in the interrogation room as I left the building. My wife saw me as I walked by and tried to make some sort of gesture. I pretended not to see her and kept walking. It was a front-page story in the local newspaper, and both Linda and Karen were mentioned by name. I'm sure they'll be getting a lot of questions about that from all our friends and relatives. I stopped at Taco Bell for lunch on the way home. That evening, I got another call from Lenny. How are things at your end, Mr. Johnson? Couldn't be better, my friend. I'm very impressed. Thank you. I always do my best, Mr. Johnson. A few days ago, I mentioned the possibility of a position here that might suit you. Do you think you might be interested? I would be interested in discussing it. Fine. There will be a ticket waiting for you at the Jamaican Airlines counter tomorrow morning. Don't worry, it will be a round-trip ticket. Lenny was laughing on the other end, a wicked little laugh. 6 weeks later, I was completely relocated to Falmouth, Jamaica. It appears Lenny Davis had many friends who had a lot of money that needed to be invested. They bought an all-inclusive resort facility that had come upon hard times. Since 90 of the clientele were from either North America or Europe, they wanted a man of my stature to be the responsible person of authority. Yes, I sold out. I was now in the position of posing as a front or a shill, so to speak. Although I was required to actually set up and manage the facility, I still reported to a clandestine group who wished to avoid any and all publicity. I was well paid and well compensated. It was an interesting position. I had a lady working with me named Maura, who was wanted by Finnish authorities for the murder of her philandering husband. As long as she stayed in Jamaica, she was safe. She was in charge of all the recreation events and advertising. Most of the other employees were locals, who for some reason seemed to have excellent work ethics. Many of them, I discovered, were hired by Lenny Davis. Interesting. There were 3 different restaurants in the facility, and the prominent menu item at each of them was goat in some fashion. Linda and Karen had been convicted of something somehow related to the incident, and they both received suspended sentences. I never even found out what the exact charges were. I hear that Calvin Barnes and Jason Ellis both accused Linda and Karen of refusing to pay their ransom. They never believed the story that no ransom demands were ever made. I think those relationships died rather fast. 5 months after relocating, my divorce was finalized. Time passes rapidly when you're having fun. 2 years have gone by. Jenny is doing great at Yale, and Steve is now at Texas A&M on a full scholarship. Linda keeps in touch with them 3 or 4 times a month by cell phone. Karen tracked Eddie down in Tennessee and had him serve with papers to get custody of the twins. A week later, Eddie and the boys were in Alaska. Maura and I moved in together. There's an odd excitement about sleeping with a woman who murdered her husband, sort of like bungee jumping. I had no further contact with Linda until last week. Mr. Johnson, I have good news and bad news. Lenny has turned into a big joker. I always have to be on my toes. Give me the bad news first. The Silver Star cruise ship arrived this morning, and your wife is on board with a gentleman friend. A chill went up my spine. What's the good news? A big grin came across his face, big enough to show the demonic gold tooth. The Jamaican authorities had her name on a special list. Since we're now using passports for all Caribbean travel, it was easy to flag her arrival. And what exactly does this mean? The former Mrs. Johnson has been detained and charges are being prepared. It seems her failure to report the kidnapping 3 years ago has been considered a criminal offense of some type. A lot of local officials were embarrassed by the whole situation, and they seemed more than eager to get a little payback. Damn, Lenny, she didn't really do anything. I know that, and you know that, but that doesn't make it go away. What is her travel companion doing to help her? Nothing. When the police explained to him what happened, he couldn't get back on the ship fast enough. I think he's planning on flying home. Linda ended up in Kingston and was charged with several minor offenses. No suspended sentences here. Some low-level U.S. Embassy people tried to intervene, but it was to no avail. She was sent to Fort Augusta for 1 year. It wasn't fair, but it seemed out of my hands. It was 3 months until I got up the courage to see her. Lenny had arranged for the visit beforehand. Mike, what are you doing here? It's so good to see you. How did you find out about this? She looked a little thinner and gaunt. Perhaps it was the lack of makeup and grooming. Linda, I live here now on the north side of the island. I've known about your problem for a while now. Why didn't you do something? You must know somebody here who can help me. What would you want me to do? Get me out of here, please. You can't imagine what this is like. I looked at her without speaking. I didn't know what to say. Mike, the guards are forcing me to provide favors for them. Favors? Sexual favors, Mike. I'm being forced or coerced to provide the male guards with sexual favors. Do I have to be more explicit? No, I think I understand. I'll see what I can do. We spent the next 30 minutes talking about the kids and what they were doing. When I left, I promised her again that I would see if I could help her. I know it doesn't make sense. I should really be happy to see the witch being torched, but she was my wife for 20 years and the mother of my children. I explained the problem to Lenny. He seemed a little confused at my concern for Linda's well-being, but promised to take care of things. As if by magic, Linda became off-limits to the guards, and there would be no repercussions. I never verified this, but I had Lenny's word, and that was good enough. The process was started to change her sentence to time served. 2 months later, I drove down to Kingston on the day she was being released and scheduled to go home. As usual, some low-level embassy personnel were taking credit for getting her sentence commuted, but I knew better. I didn't get to talk to her, but we saw each other from afar. She was smiling, sort of, and wearing a powder blue maternity dress as she walked across the tarmac. Never saw her again, never intend to. Thanks for watching this intense tale of betrayal and revenge. What do you think the future holds for the characters in this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking stories.